am a senior managing director of in the technology segment here at FTI, where I co-lead our legal operations practice. I am a licensed attorney and began my career in-house with a large insurance provider, but about 10 years ago pivoted into helping general counsel and heads of legal operations run their legal department like a business. So really focused on, do you have the right people, process, and technology in place to best serve your internal and external customers? I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Brandon Lee, to have him introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Brandon Lee. I'm the managing director, as Susan mentioned, based also in Chicago. I've been in this space for over 20 years, but 15 years providing consultative services to the Office of General Counsel and to legal departments. I find myself to be a trusted advisor, sometimes an advocate, sometimes an individual to really assist clients in understanding how technology can be utilized within the legal department. So with no further ado, I think that we can go ahead and get started into the presentation.
Excellent. So as we mentioned at the beginning, our focus today is really going to be on generative AI and the impact that is having on both the business and the corporate legal department, as well as how it is being incorporated into legal operations. So a big mandate on something that's very new, very hot, and I would expect a lot of you are dealing with on a day-to-day basis right now. In today's session, we're going to hit on a couple of things. First, kind of generative AI in the news and the increasing interest in all things AI. I'm sure that you all are getting daily emails on this topic. So we'll hit a little bit of that. Understanding what that means and what the benefits of artificial intelligence might be for both your business and your legal department. We'll dig in a little bit on some industry insights. We have some statistics that we'll share with you, as well as some emerging use cases. Really so that we can all understand what our peers are saying about generative AI. From there, we'll move into the regulatory environment, because today is a CLE. So we'll dig in a little bit on what we're seeing in terms of regulation, as well as some non-regulatory events as well. We'll hit ethical obligations and considerations, make sure that we get everybody their ethics credit. And then lastly, we'll hit on some Q&A. We'll try to reserve a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. That said, please feel free throughout the presentation to drop your questions in the chat. Brandon and I will be monitoring that, and we may pause throughout to address those questions kind of in the moment. So please don't feel like you have to hold them to the end, although we will try to save some time at the end. Awesome. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it off to Brandon to hit on the news.
Sounds great, Meredith. Thank you very much. And, as both Susan and Meredith stated, that we've been inundated with information regarding AI, particularly generative AI and associated benefits and risks. You'd probably be very hard pressed not to hear about AI in any of the news outlets that you particularly use, be it podcasts, Fox or CNN, or even as it relates to any type of other news outlets that you would utilize. When I look at the news headlines, there are a couple of things that do pop up that come of interest to me. One is just really the explosion of awareness. I think with that level of awareness, there is a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge really regarding AI, and there is also a healthy dose of skepticism around it too. Second item is there's really a drive to capitalize and monetize on AI technology and also AI innovation. As you can see here from these headlines, two of the largest giants in legal technology, both Thomson Reuters, which is Westlaw, and also LexisNexis, have made significant investments in acquisitions and in investments in order to bolster their platforms with AI usage. So really, they're trying to capitalize on that on AI. The last item that I think is, also you can tell from the headlines is that there's a desire to harness via regulations or legislation the use of AI. You can see the ChatGPT lawsuits that are flurry, but also I want to draw your attention to the Texas judges, Judge Starr's recent certification, which is a mandatory certification that is, I believe, it's unheard of. There's no, it's precedent setting that there is a certification that's out there for this. And Judge Starr in his statement stated that there were, for filings of court, that there was no portion of a filing could be generated via AI, or if there was generated by AI, that there needed to be accuracy, a human involvement on checking the accuracy of that. You know, this really, I think, strikes a really balance of the use and the importance of AI, but also like marries it with the ability to have human influence. And I think that you're going to hear that throughout our presentation, where we do understand and recognize that there are significant benefits that can be drawn from AI, but we do believe that there is going to still need to be a human influence and advocacy from that perspective. So Meredith, I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to share as relates to any of these striking news headlines, but I think that that covers this for us.
No, I would just add that as we were pulling this list of news clippings together, one of the things that we noticed is that we could pull this today and there would be new news clippings as well. So just something to be aware of, that this is a rapidly evolving space. And every day we're hit with new and additional news around this area, especially as it impacts the legal department.
Understanding artificial intelligence, you know, I really think that this is a key element, and we really wanted to provide a baseline of understanding. We won't dive very deeply into like some of the technical terminology of it, because I'm not a data scientist. I am a legal technologist that's focused on AI primarily in the e-discovery space, but I'm not a data scientist. And so some data scientists may have some issue with some of the things that how we might phrase and describe it. But I do think that the definition that you see is a very cheeky way of really speaking about AI, and it's something that I think is critical. You know, really that seems intelligent. I think that that's a funny way to look at it. But when we look at AI, I would say that AI is really an umbrella of categories. Under that umbrella of categories, you will find machine learning and natural language processing and large language models. But really, all these are tools that have the capacity to be trained and not programmed. And I think that that's a critical distinction between technology that we've seen in the past and where we see it now. As it relates for machine learning, really that focus is, as it states here, is really a programming that'll allow it to take large algorithms and make a significant analysis on large documents and learn from insights so that it can then make informed decisions. As it relates to natural language processing, I think that you'll probably find that you may have used natural language processing in some capacity just today. Either it'd be with your email spam detection. I don't know how many of you may use Google Translate on a daily basis, but Google Translate definitely is one way in which natural language processing is at play. And also some of the virtual agents that are out there. Be it Siri or Alexa, are all aspects of natural language processing, and this is some AI that's at work, and it's really utilizing the language, the spoken human language, in order to run those algorithms and make those determinations regarding the informed decisions that is being made. Lastly, but not least, is large language models, and that's really just advanced algorithms that really utilize to generate a believable human text based on text-based tasks. Large language models are basically derived, generative AI is derived from large language models. And that's what has been really the focus of a lot of conversation lately. I will note that when we talk about generative AI and large language models, that ChatGPT and generative AI are not synonymous. I think that we need to draw that distinction, that generative AI is a part of large language models, but ChatGPT is really an OpenAI's public chat box called ChatGPT. And so I know that there's a tendency for us to equate ChatGPT like Band-Aids and Kleenex and trying to associate it with some of the more generic areas. But that there is that clear distinction that all generative AI is large language models. Lastly, that I wanted to kind of just touch on here is, as we look at the timeline continuum here, there is a strong concern that we have already moved towards the iRobot state of affairs, and that we are going to be taken over by robots. And quite the reality of it is we've made significant advances. We will continue to make significant advances and it's probably going to be a very compressed in time and very rapid approach for AI, but we are so far away from ever being in that situation where we are at the iRobot. And I think that that's something that we should kind of step back and think about as we approach, think about, and utilize AI.
I think you're spot on with this one. And what I think is really important for people to understand is I believe that a lot of us felt a seismic shift in November when ChatGPT was launched. And people became so interested in how can I use ChatGPT in my job every day. And it felt like such a huge leap from where we were to where we are. And it was. But the other important thing to note, and this is what Brandon was really getting to at the end, is the speed at which this is going to accelerate and new advancements in AI are going to come down the pike. And so part of that plays into our job or our role within an organization as the legal department to really set the foundation and the framework for monitoring and managing AI in a way that we hadn't previously felt the need, because the changes that are happening today are going to appear small to the changes that are coming down the pike.
I mean, there's anticipation for the slide, and there's anticipation for the benefits of generative AI. And I think that we all know that we're talking about an extremely powerful tool that is going to change how we live our lives, but also how we conduct our businesses. But there is anticipation. It's with bated breath that we wait and see how it's going to be actually utilized within our organizations. For particularly in the legal space, we're definitely seeing automation of automation, predictions of how people are utilizing, both case trends and patterns, how we can more efficiently review documents, contracts, locate specific cases, pertinent cases, and really leverage it in that capacity. When we look at, I think that we're going to really critically start to see benefits or people seeking benefits is really around the personalizing experiences section and really trying to understand that, as an audience. And funny that we were having this conversation with Walter is that, the thought was earlier was that there is an ability that we feel that there's going to get distilled down into particular segments or industries that are going to have generative AI-based focused areas. And I quite frankly think that that's going to be where we're going to see a lot of benefits, where there are going to be generative AI tools and applications that are going to be specific to our industry, and particularly specific to the legal industry that we'll be able to leverage. I do think that comes with these benefits, we should break down and kind of demystify to some extent that artificial intelligence concern or fear. And I do think that we're going to see more of, and this is where the data scientists would probably come in and have some issue with this, but I think that we're going to really move more into an augmented intelligence world. And that's really where humans are really kept in the loop and still play a key role in making decisions as it relates to how AI is being utilized. And so I think that that's going to be critical. And those are going to be ways in which we can really harness the benefits and put forth benefits in driving forward, our productivity, and also in most situations that a lot of businesses are concerned about, driving, better bottom lines.
Now we're going to get to the interactive portion of today's session.
We really want to see, is your company exploring ways to use generative AI? We recognize that it's early days. There's a lot of organizations that are interested, maybe tiptoeing into it. Some organizations have taken put a full foot into it and really started to explore it. And really, we like to hear where do you sit as it relates to your overall organization? And it looks like that a significant number of you are exploring ways to use generative AI. I'm sure that a lot of the business units that you support are pressing for this heavily. There's probably a lot of conversation at your C-suite around how can we utilize this? How can we help drive productivity within our organization? How can we utilize it to really increase revenue? And it looks like that's the case here. And that's not surprising, because I think that we see in the literature and the surveys that we've read that that's very much the case. Now, the next one is, I think, a little bit more specific, and we were interested in seeing what your specific legal department are, if your specific legal departments are exploring ways to use generative AI. It's moving around. The yes is moving back and forth, but I think that we're pretty much at a point where we know that the no's outweigh the yeses, and that's not surprising. That healthy dose of skepticism typically does come from the risk-averse lawyers in the House, and so therefore that's not surprising. But we are seeing that is a shifting change. That more and more attorneys and legal department, legal operations practitioners are looking to utilize AI in some capacity. I know that there is a strong push from individuals from the e-discovery ranks within your organizations that have already gone down the paths of using some level of AI, that are pushing for it or are able to be advocates for how to properly use AI and ultimately understand how and when this is actually going to be something that is more defensible and more something that can be relied upon. But this is not surprising, and I think that we're going to, when we look into some of the use cases and some of the industry insights that Meredith will touch on, we're going to see that this trend aligns very, very nicely.
What we want to do is we'll cover a little bit here on what some of the larger surveys have found so far. So this is from a survey performed by Thomson Reuters, the Thomson Reuters Institute, earlier this year. It was a survey of a combined tax and lawyer professionals. But what we found interesting is that 82% of lawyers felt that generative AI could possibly be used for legal work, which was surprising. I think we would have expected a stronger amount of skepticism from those lawyer ranks, but 82% of lawyers felt that it could be used. On the flip side, 52% of lawyers felt that it should be used. And that, again, isn't surprising. Additionally, 19% of lawyers felt that it absolutely shouldn't be used, with the remaining group being skeptical, in the middle, undecided. Again, this is very consistent with what we've seen from your responses. 52%, I think we saw 67% of the group on the call today isn't currently exploring how to use generative AI in their legal departments. So overall, very consistent responses with what we're seeing in the larger market. But despite those strong feelings, Thomson Reuters also noted that only 4% of respondents felt that or said that they were actually using generative AI as one of their legal department tools. So again, there's a desire to use it amongst some of the ranks, about 50% of the ranks, but only 4% have actually found ways to use it within the legal department so far.
Yeah, and I will say that I suspect that education plays a role in this. I do think that as our peers become more and more educated and understand AI and their ability to differentiate it from ChatGPT, we might see a movement, a shift in some of these rankings. Yeah.
Thanks, Brandon. So the next follow-on question would be, well, how are these 4%? How are these 4% of legal departments using it? Or how do individuals who think that we should be using generative AI in the legal department think that we should be using it? And what you see here are 6 use cases that are the most common that are arising. Not surprisingly, the first that comes up is contract drafting and review. I think we've all had to review or prepare low complexity agreements endlessly. The minor annoyance that is the NDA, I think, is what everybody is thinking about here. How could we pull that together using ChatGPT or generative AI? How could we review it more efficiently? So that seems to be the first area where people are very anxious to see some progress. And a lot of the technology vendors are making some improvements in this space. Second is in the area of legal research. One of the strengths that we've seen in our testing of generative AI is its ability to summarize vast amounts of information in a way that allows us to more efficiently get through those vast amounts of information, obviously still being responsible and reviewing that for accuracy, but it does review large quantities of information very quickly. And so people are looking to expedite legal research here. Third is really question answering services, and that's largely those chatbots or Q&As that you get repeatedly throughout the legal department or even the compliance department, quick things that can be answered by AI that don't necessarily require a lawyer's intervention. This is a controversial one here, brief or memo drafting and review. And I think we all saw the impact of leveraging ChatGPT to draft your briefs in the Air Avianca case. There is obviously a very important part that the lawyer plays in making sure that what is produced by ChatGPT is accurate and is not based off of made up cases. We'll talk about the ability of generative AI or ChatGPT specifically to hallucinate. We'll talk about that in a minute. But brief or memo writing or drafting and review is another area that we're seeing a lot of desire for generative AI. The last two, knowledge management is a big one. I think that we would all like to not have to redo work over and over again. And knowledge management is something that I think a lot of legal departments and even law firms struggle with. How to best capture decisions that have already been made so that you're consistent in your decision making. How to capture knowledge given the high turnover of individuals in a very hot job market. So knowledge management is a nut that's been difficult to crack, and there's high hopes that generative AI can assist with that. And then lastly is back office functions. It's a huge part of my practice to really help lawyers focus on being lawyers and not having to bear the burden of administrative tasks. And we're seeing a lot of desire for ChatGPT or generative AI. Brandon's going to call me out on saying ChatGPT too much, but generative AI to really help lessen that burden, that administrative burden across the legal department.
And I will say in regard to the back office functions is that we currently see a lot of just AI in back office functions. You know, if that's in kind of RPA, which is robotic process automation, or some of those kind of routine activities being utilized, it may not be in the generative way in which it's really kind of thinking and creating content, but ways in which you're able to utilize it on a routine basis, on repeatable fashions. That's something that has been integrated into those back office functions for quite some time, and we still see it there, and it's becoming more robust. The interesting shift will be if the generative element of AI will start to see more and more presence in back office functions.
Brandon raises a really good point, and FTI conducts a survey every year of general counsel. And one of the questions that we've held consistent for the past 3 years is whether or not your legal department is using artificial intelligence, is using AI. And interestingly, this year, the statistic of, or the amount of legal departments that said that they were using AI decreased. And what we really believe that to be is that they're using AI, but they don't actually know that they're using AI because it's not generative AI. It's a different type. It's RPA, as Brandon mentioned. And so we've made such a massive leap in what people think is possible with AI that what is kind of more basic is not even realized to be artificial intelligence anymore. So we wanted to provide a bit of a framework. We know that a lot of organizations are struggling with how to create policies or procedures around monitoring the use of AI across the organization, understanding who's using generative AI, what information is provided into the tool, what information is retained by the tool, et cetera. And so we're going to give you a few different regulatory frameworks that we've seen. This is an area that truthfully is evolving. it's rapidly evolving, and we'll see that in a couple of slides. And therefore, I believe that everything that we're going to talk about may change tomorrow. But we wanted to provide a framework as you were trying to explore what to allow your business to use, what information to provide into a tool like ChatGPT, et cetera. We're going to start with the EU's risk-based framework. And the reason, recognizing that we're all sitting in the United States and we're speaking to a bunch of lawyers from Texas, why are we starting with the EU framework? It's important for us to note here that we do think that the regulation around artificial intelligence, around generative AI specifically, is going to follow a lot of the same regulatory path that we saw with GDPR and privacy regulation. And that just has a lot to do with who's first to try and regulate it and its use. And the EU was mid-preparation of this framework when generative AI kind of came to the fore. And because of that, we're starting with this more as an opportunity for companies to take this framework back and use it in assessing the risk of using generative AI. So what you see here is the EU Commission's risk-based approach to regulation. And it really is based off of these categories of minimal or no risk associated with the use, limited risk, high risk, and unacceptable risk. And there's definitions that are that come behind this that are still in flux, frankly. And so if a company were to apply this right now, we would recommend deciding what your vision of minimal or no risk is, limited risk, high risk, unacceptable risk. But with that comes, is it prohibited or is it permitted, and in what mitigating activities need to occur when you use it. So with minimal or no risk, it's permitted and with no restrictions. With limited risk, it's permitted, but subject to information or transparency obligations. And that's something that we are expecting to see a lot of in it, similarly to privacy, where you must be transparent about the data that you're collecting. We believe that similar rules are going to be put into place around the transparency that we are using AI to undertake an activity. A good example of this is the New York City rule on being transparent about using AI in hiring decisions. So if you are using an AI tool to scrape resumes and it becomes part of your decisioning process, you must disclose to the applicant that you are using AI in that way. High risk activities is really where you're going to start to see more mitigating activities. So you're going to be subject to more compliance with AI requirements and a conformity assessment. Again, this is really based on the EU framework, but again, we're really looking to see companies start to implement this kind of tiered risk-based framework. Now turning to the United States, we wanted to highlight kind of the patchwork attempts at managing AI from a regulatory basis. So what you see here is on the left-hand side is essentially a 50-state survey that was compiled by Brian Cave. This is current as of April 13th, 2023, recognizing that 3 months has passed. And with respect to generative AI, that's whole versions of generative AI at this point. So again, this is going to be a bit of a race here, but the point being that the regulations around AI are very patchwork. You'll see more than about 50% of states have no legislation proposed at this time. Of that remaining 25, or of that remaining 50%, about half have proposed legislation and half have enacted legislation. And if you dig into these a little bit more, what you'll see is that they're very targeted at specific use cases. So just because we're on the phone with a bunch of Texas folks, the Texas regulation here is really a healthcare related directive, or it's really a healthcare related regulation. So the use of AI with respect to diagnoses by artificial intelligence. So that's a very high level summary, and those of you that have probably dealt with it or know that I'm butchering it a little bit. But the point being that it's not necessarily a wide swath regulation on artificial intelligence and its use. It's very use case specific.
Yeah. And just for an order of magnitude, I mean, I think that in 2023, there was like 43 different bills that were introduced as relates to AI. Now there's variations of what was passed and what failed, but it really just shows you that there's a lot of activity going on at the state and local levels regarding AI. And I believe that until we have federal legislation that like overlaps or kind of supersedes any of the state and local levels, as you as an organization begin to make decisions about how you're going to utilize AI, generative AI in your businesses, you're going to have to look at it on a state-by-state basis and not look to anything from a federal perspective. I do think that we probably are still going to see some activity on the federal level, but right now we really are at the state level. And as you can see, even in Texas, what Governor Abbott did is really come up with an advisory council. We're seeing more and more states state that we would like to have an advisory council that really digs into how we want to handle AI and AI regulations and legislation on a state basis. And so coming out of that council, I do suspect that they're within months, I wouldn't say years, within months, you will see some legislation that will be passed in the state of Texas as it relates to how AI is being utilized.
But these regulations are all kind of being proposed from an ethical standpoint. So there are a number of ethical concerns when it comes to the use of artificial intelligence and generative AI. And this just highlights kind of 6 that we've been talking about internally, not the least of which is unknown capabilities. It's still an untested technology. And so we're really trying to understand how far it can go in the generative space. Data leakage, again, using something like ChatGPT or OpenAI's tool requires you to provide information into the tool, be it just a prompt or uploading of additional information. And what that leads to is data leakage. You will see I believe it's the CEO of OpenAI has been asked to report on what information is retained from those prompts. But a big concern is really the leakage of data from your organization into tools that are not private. Lack of transparency also ties in a little bit with bias and toxicity, but lack of transparency, no one really knows 100% the framework upon which tools like ChatGPT or OpenAI are built. Because it is a general AI model, is intentionally learning as it goes, and therefore there's a lot of transparency as to what the model is actually built upon and what it's been fed. That can translate into bias and toxicity. If you train the AI, or if the AI is ingesting biased or toxic materials, the output is then going to be something that is biased or toxic. And so using something that we have that lack of transparency and is biased, but we don't know, is a challenge. We talked a little bit earlier around the hallucination effect. And we learned that again in the Bianca case, where the lawyer, the tool made up case law and the lawyer relied upon that. And so that's a big challenge, particularly for lawyers who are required to validate that that's actually true. And then lastly is copyright. And this is where I am not an intellectual property attorney, but there are big challenges around who owns the copyright for something that's generated by a generative AI tool. Additionally, are you giving up your copyright by providing information to the tool? It's a big challenge, the intellectual property piece. We've seen it already come up in the context of things that have been generated by the tool. And I suspect that that's going to be a huge area of case law in the future.
Definitely. I definitely think that from the bias and toxicity in the copyright section, we're going to see a significant number of lawsuits being filed as it relates to that. Sarah Silverman and several other comedians or actors have already filed suit, and from a copyright perspective, based upon what the usage of their monologues, their information on ChatGPT without their permission. So I do suspect that we're going to see heavy lawsuits from those two areas, but and so that's something to be considered. ABA actually has been actively working to also bring resolutions or present resolutions that lawyers can utilize to garner or kind of drive thoughts. There have been, I would say that there's three resolutions. 112 is what we're going to talk about here, but also resolution 700 and also resolution 604 that have talked in various degrees about how to leverage or utilize AI. Both of those were done in 2022 and also 2023. But here, this resolution 112, although we're talking about generative AI in 2023, this was a 2019 resolution that really spoke to AI broadly. I think it has applicability today too, specifically as it relates to the bias, explainability, and transparency element. That's really seeking that lawyers and courts really have to, if they're going to use AI, that they have to be able to explain the outcomes and how the inner workings of AI, and also be aware that there may be bias so that they can communicate if there is a bias that may be there. I think that this really drives out of the days of the black box AI days, where it's like we just put information into a tool and then we get this outcome and we really don't know how it happens, but we should be able to leverage it and rely on it. And no longer is that something that at least the ABA promotes, and I think it's been accepted by various, that's something that we can do and that there needs to be explainability there. We talked about kind of ethical and beneficial usage already, and I think that that's kind of self-explanatory. The last piece is really around the controls and oversight. And that's really like lawyers have to be able to question the use of AI and also the vendors that are provided. And we will see later down that there are some of the model rules and some of the duties that lawyers have that will really speak further to that. And I think it nicely dovetails into the model rules and also the Texas display rules of professional conduct around what you are asking of, how are you interrogating the AI or the vendors that you're using when you're going to put that into your practice. Meredith and I both thought we would kind of speak to this. I think that this is a healthy dose of ethical elements. I think that it's critical. I think it's a crux of where we're at. We have here, various different ABA model rules, but most of these model rules have then been adopted by Texas, and you can see the associated Texas rule. And I think that starting even at the competency and diligence section, really there's been 40 states or so that have, taken the competency and diligence duty to really include a technology competency, that you have to be up to date and aware of the use of technology and how it's being utilized, and that you are going out of your way in order to learn about, to be aware of it. Now, it's not that you need to know all the intricacies, know the algorithms, know how the data scientists are conducting it, but you have to be able to be informed about the use of it and how it can be displayed, and also those potential harms and risks, and be able to articulate that to your client. And this, like I said, I think that this is mentioned in the resolution 112. It's reinforced here, and I think it's really critical. I think that when we talk about the Texas or the ABA Rule 1.1 and Texas Rule 1.0, the push is that you do have to go out and take courses like this that provide you with that education and that guidance around the technology. And I think that this is just going to continue to be reinforced. These rules are very different than what we see in just general business or just generally. We have an additional obligation and duty as attorneys that places this additional burden on us to do that. And I think that once you are competent, I think that the next piece really comes into play. communication. Are you able, you have to be able to communicate to your client if you're going to utilize AI. Can you communicate its approach, how it's going to be utilized to your client in a reasonable way and in a responsible way? And the only way you're going to be able to do that communication is if you have some baseline understanding. And I think that is that goes part and parcel. Meredith, I don't know if you have anything additional that you want to speak to that particular piece. But one other thing that I did want to say as it relates to that is that part of that competency and understanding is also understanding limitations. And limitations are critical to know, because, for example, Chat GPT, which everyone thinks is just generative AI, has a limitation of, any information that was from September 21st and prior, right? And so there is a cutoff there. And if you were not aware of that, you cannot articulate that, then how could you reasonably rely on it in present day for things that you would like to utilize in any briefing or any advice that you would be providing to your clients?
I would just echo Brandon that really here, and we saw it again with the New York regulation, it's really about the duty to disclose and consult with your client on when you're using it, why you're using it, how you're using it, and the efficacy of the results. Again, understanding those limitations, but it's about that free flow of communication and ensuring that everyone is aware that you are, it's that duty to make sure that everyone is aware that you are using it.
And then moving on to the confidentiality section, I think obviously confidentiality is a key element of any legal representation, and we hold it very dear that we are able to keep clients' information in confidence and maintain it as such. And with the use of AI, there's a lot of times, and even ChatGPT, indicates right in the front and right in the beginning of using it, that this is a public chatbot, that ultimately any information that you provide into this chatbot will be potentially utilized by others. And so therefore, that may right there limit some ability for you to want to utilize that from a confidentiality perspective. But I think the thought is that if you are using any organization tool that have a generative AI or an AI element of it, that you really interrogate and understand, where that data is going to go if you are submitting that information in, because you have that obligation to maintain your client's information in confidence.
Yeah. I would just add here that we're seeing a lot of excitement and desire from our clients, from our legal department clients, business partners. So the folks out in the business to use generative AI, to use AI in some of the tools that they already have. We're seeing a lot of software vendors announce that they've incorporated generative AI into their tool. Microsoft actually came out and is integrating some elements of generative AI into Outlook. And so understanding that and working with your IT business partners or folks who are responsible for sourcing technology and understanding what information is being shared and how is really important as we start to make these technological advancements. I don't mean to scare everyone, because I know everyone probably uses Outlook or Word or some Microsoft product at some point. So it's important to understand just what functionality you're turning on when your software vendor says, I have this cool new thing I want you to try.
We do have a question from the audience, and it's, do you think regulatory boards, law, medicine, et cetera, will make use of AI standards of care? If not, regulatory boards will ensure, if so, in what realistic time frame?
That's a good question. I do anticipate that we're going to see the regulatory boards come out with frameworks. Again, that's why we're looking at the model rules. I think that we're going to see some instruction on how to use the model rules within law. I think medicine is similarly, medicine has been subject to a lot of regulation recently, particularly around the privacy, PHI, PII. So I do think that they're going to be very quick to move here. We're seeing a lot of it in the pixel litigation for ad tech related to medical healthcare. So I do think that they're going to be very quick on the ball here.
I concur. I did want to speak on the supervision piece because I think that there's a unique nuance to this that I think we should discuss. As everyone obviously probably understands the duty to supervise paraprofessionals, paralegals, and the like of the work that they do on behalf of the provision of legal services. But in 2012, this was modified to really also include human or not. And so I think that that's a critical understanding that as part of the duty of supervision, it is also the technology that you use that you need to be able to supervise and leverage accordingly. And so to ensure that there's accuracy and there's proper considerations for disclosure of risk. And it's not just those individuals that you employ to assist in the delivery of your services, but also the technology that you use. And that's something that has been set forth by the ABA, but also has been adopted, and you see it almost in a mirror situation for the Texas.
Yeah.
Last piece, although it's not on the slide, I think that it is something that is also a critical element is regarding fees, and this is Model Rule 1.5 and also Texas Rule 1.04. And the reason why I bring it up is because the duty is to provide to have reasonable fees and submit reasonable fees to your clients. And the one thing that I think that there may be a situation where your lack of use of AI may be deemed as being, unreasonable, exorbitant in comparison to when you can utilize AI. And so that's something just to be monitoring about, as you have that duty about regarding your fees, is whether, if your use could be aided to provide a more costly, manageable product for your client. That is something that you might need to consider and think about. Yeah. I mean, I guess with all this being said, I do think that there is like a balancing act that we are continuously seeing with the regulations and the legislation and supervision, but also with the human element and our ability to think through how we want to utilize AI and really interrogate and utilize it.
Yeah. And I'll just add on here before we get to our last poll question. Brandon mentioned earlier Governor Abbott's council on artificial intelligence use. And we had a comment come in that says that highlighted that the Texas legislature is about to adjourn and won't meet again until 2025. And so to that end, we may see states that take a while to adopt, just given regular legislative cycles as well. And so that's where those advisory councils may come into play, or maybe more important. So we're going to move into our last poll question, and we want to know from you, how is your company managing or mitigating the risks associated with generative AI? So hopefully you still have that browser open in your phone.
Maybe when you kind of talk about this, maybe kind of provide some context around some of the answers in case people are unaware of what that really means.
Absolutely. So what I would say is these results are very consistent with what we've been hearing. I think that even the most advanced companies are kind of still in the policy stage, right? We've created a policy for how generative AI can be used within the organization. We launched a new policy with some training associated with it. Really, that policy piece was kind of the first step that we saw everyone take. Alongside that, we saw some blacklisting. So essentially having your IT department blacklist the website for ChatGPT, so OpenAI, or other generative AI tools. So making sure nobody in the company can access that tool. Whitelisting kind of came along with those new policies. So for selective individuals within the organization, you can submit a request to use OpenAI, and then it can be whitelisted and made accessible to you, but you must provide a use case and how you're going to use it, and then likely sign an additional policy that says this is how I will be using it, and I won't provide company confidential information, etc. That governance structure is something that we saw come quickly after the implementation of the new policies. So really having a group of individuals who are responsible for understanding what are the prompts that are being entered, what information is expected to be returned from the tool, and really monitoring that. We actually have one of those at FTI that Brandon and I would have to submit our generative AI request to, should we use it. Employee training is something that we're expecting to see in the next annual employee ethics and compliance training to come out. So we're starting to see that roll on as companies get to their annual trainings. Lastly, other, I would be interested to understand what some of the other activities are. And then that 9% that said none, that's not inconsistent either. So we're seeing things across the board, but really those new policies are the first things that we're seeing. The last note that I'll make on this is that I spoke with one gentleman whose company was very quick and rolled out a policy in February of this year. And he was noting in June that it was already obsolete. So it's something that we're expecting to see evolve over time for sure. We are, I believe, at time. We maybe have 1 minute to take any additional questions that might come in, but I don't see any in the chat. As we close out, I just want to highlight that we have a number of colleagues that sit in Dallas or in Texas. Amy, Anthony, and Ron are good people for you to know if you're interested in understanding a little bit about what Brandon and I do or what our colleagues at FTI do. I suspect that you might see them on the pickleball court, so please be nice to them or don't. It's up to you, your choice. But if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, Brandon, Amy, Anthony, or Ron. Any or all of us can help get you to the right person. We will also be sharing these slides, including the poll results, with Susan, and she'll be able to share those with you. So thank you again very much for your time today. We really appreciate it. We hope you learned something. And again, we look forward to talking to you soon.